How the atomic bomb changed warfare forever. On August 6, 1945, at exactly 8:15 in the morning, a single bomb fell from the belly of a B-29 bomber over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. 43 seconds later, the world changed forever. In that fraction of a minute, more than 70,000 people were vaporized, incinerated, or crushed to death. Buildings were reduced to shadows. The temperature at ground zero reached over 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel. But this wasn't just another bombing raid in a war that had already seen millions die. This was the moment when humanity discovered it now possessed the power to destroy itself completely. And warfare, as it had been understood for thousands of years, became something entirely different. If you're fascinated by how a single technological breakthrough can reshape human civilization, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we're diving deep into stories that changed our world forever. The story begins decades before Hiroshima, in the quiet laboratories of Europe where scientists were unlocking the fundamental secrets of matter itself. In 1905, Albert Einstein published his famous equation, E=mc², suggesting that mass and energy were interchangeable. A single gram of matter, if converted entirely to energy, would release the equivalent of 21,500 tons of TNT. But it was just mathematics. Nobody knew how to actually access that energy. By the 1930s, physicists had learned to split atoms by bombarding them with neutrons. When uranium atoms were split, they released energy and more neutrons, which could split more atoms in a chain reaction. The theoretical possibility of releasing atomic energy was becoming real. Everything changed in January 1939, when two German chemists announced they had successfully split a uranium atom. Within weeks, physicists around the world realized the terrifying implications. If a chain reaction happened all at once, it would create an explosion unlike anything ever seen. And 1939 was the worst possible time for such a discovery, because Europe was about to plunge into World War II. Several Jewish scientists who had fled Nazi Germany understood immediately what this meant. If Hitler developed an atomic bomb first, the war would be over before it began. Leo Szilard convinced Albert Einstein to sign a letter to President Roosevelt warning of the danger. The letter, delivered in October 1939, explained that extremely powerful bombs could be constructed and that Germany was likely already working on them. After Pearl Harbor in 1941, everything accelerated. The Army took control of what became the Manhattan Project and placed it under General Leslie Groves, who appointed J. Robert Oppenheimer as scientific director. The challenge was enormous. They had to build an entire industrial and scientific infrastructure from scratch, while the war raged on. Oppenheimer established a secret laboratory in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where the best physicists worked in complete secrecy. Meanwhile, massive facilities were built in Oak Ridge, Tennessee to enrich uranium, and in Hanford, Washington to produce plutonium. Oak Ridge alone employed over 75,000 workers, most of whom had no idea what they were building. The scientists developed two bomb designs. The uranium bomb used a simple gun-type mechanism, but plutonium required a complex implosion design where conventional explosives compressed a plutonium core to critical mass. This required perfect synchronization of dozens of explosive charges. As they worked frantically through 1943 and 1944, they feared Germany might be ahead of them. But when Germany surrendered in May 1945, American forces discovered the Nazi atomic program had never gotten close to success. The primary motivation for the Manhattan Project had been based on a threat that never materialized. But the war in the Pacific continued, and planners were preparing for an invasion of Japan, estimated to cost 1 million Allied casualties. On July 16, 1945, the world's first nuclear weapon was tested in the New Mexico desert. The test, codenamed Trinity, exceeded all predictions. The explosion was equivalent to 21,000 tons of TNT. A flash brighter than a dozen suns illuminated the desert. The mushroom cloud was visible from 200 miles away. As Oppenheimer watched, he recalled a line from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. President Truman, negotiating in Potsdam, was informed of the successful test. He now had to make the most consequential decision in human history. Should the weapon be used? After debate among advisors, Truman decided to use the bomb on a Japanese city to end the war quickly. Hiroshima was chosen as the target. On August 6th, the B-29 bomber Enola dropped Little Boy over the city center. It detonated 1,900 feet above ground. The flash of thermal radiation instantly incinerated people within a mile of ground zero, leaving only shadows burned into stone. The blast wave destroyed everything for miles. Between 70,000 and 80,000 people died instantly. By the end of 1945, radiation sickness would bring the death toll to around 140,000. Truman announced that if Japan didn't surrender, they could expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. But Japan's military leadership did not immediately surrender. 3 days later, on August 9th, another B-29 dropped Fat Man on Nagasaki. The explosion was even more powerful, killing approximately 40,000 people instantly, with the death toll eventually reaching 80,000. 6 days later, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender. World War II was over. The atomic age had begun. For all of human history, war had been limited by physical constraints. Now, one plane with one bomb could destroy an entire city. A single weapon could kill a nation's entire leadership and cripple its ability to fight back. The implications were staggering and immediate. The United States emerged as the only nuclear power, but everyone knew this monopoly couldn't last. Stalin had already been informed by Soviet spies who had infiltrated the Manhattan Project. American intelligence estimated it would take the Soviets perhaps a decade to develop their own bomb. They were wrong. On August 29, 1949, just 4 years after Hiroshima, the Soviet Union successfully tested its first atomic bomb. The American nuclear monopoly was over, and the world entered a new and terrifying era. With two nuclear-armed superpowers locked in ideological struggle, military strategists recognized that traditional concepts of victory became meaningless. You can't win a war if your own country is reduced to radioactive ash. This led to one of the most paradoxical concepts in military history: mutually assured destruction, or MAD. If both sides possessed enough nuclear weapons to completely destroy each other, neither would dare start a nuclear war because it would mean their own annihilation. Your security depended not on your ability to defend yourself, but on your ability to guarantee the attacker's death. It was a bizarre inversion of military logic. You kept the peace by being strong enough to ensure everyone would lose. The arms race accelerated with terrifying speed. Scientists developed the hydrogen bomb, based on nuclear fusion rather than fission. Where atomic bombs were measured in kilotons, hydrogen bombs would be measured in megatons, millions of tons of TNT equivalent. On November 1, 1952, the United States detonated the first thermonuclear device, Ivy Mike, yielding 10.4 megatons, nearly 700 times more powerful than Hiroshima. The blast vaporized an entire island. 9 months later, the Soviet Union tested their first hydrogen bomb. By the mid-1950s, both superpowers possessed arsenals capable of ending human civilization. War planners developed horrifying scenarios where launching the entire nuclear arsenal would kill 600 million people within hours. The closest the world came to nuclear war was the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. American spy planes discovered Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. President Kennedy demanded their removal and established a naval blockade. For 13 days, the world held its breath. American nuclear forces went to DEFCON 2, one step below war. At one point, a Soviet submarine captain, believing his ship was under attack, came close to launching a nuclear torpedo. He was stopped only because one officer, Vasily Arkhipov, refused to give consent. Arkhipov may have single-handedly prevented nuclear war. The crisis was resolved through secret negotiations, but it terrified both leaders. They had looked into the abyss and realized how easily they could stumble into catastrophe. The arms race continued through the Cold War. The number of nuclear weapons peaked in the mid-1980s, with the United States possessing around 23,000 warheads and the Soviet Union around 45,000. Together, they had enough to destroy every major city on Earth multiple times over. Scientists calculated that the massive firestorms from nuclear war would inject smoke into the upper atmosphere, blocking sunlight for months or years in a nuclear winter. Global temperatures would plummet, crops would fail, and most remaining humans would starve. Nuclear war wasn't just a threat to the combatants, it was a threat to all human life. Arms control efforts made some progress. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968 created a framework to limit the spread of nuclear weapons. Various treaties in the 1970s and 80s placed limits on strategic weapons and eliminated certain classes of missiles. The end of the Cold War in 1991 dramatically reduced the risk of superpower nuclear war, but it didn't eliminate nuclear danger. New nuclear powers emerged. Britain in 1952, France in 1960, China in 1964, India and Pakistan in 1998, and North Korea in 2006. Each new nuclear power added complexity and risk to the global system. Perhaps the most frightening possibility today is nuclear terrorism. A terrorist group that obtained even a crude nuclear device could kill hundreds of thousands. The materials needed to build a simple bomb could fit in a van. You can't deter a non-state actor with threats of retaliation because they have no territory to attack. Traditional nuclear strategy doesn't apply. Meanwhile, roughly 13,000 nuclear warheads still exist worldwide, most owned by the United States and Russia. Arms control efforts have stalled in recent years. The nuclear arms control architecture built over decades is crumbling. The atomic bomb didn't just introduce a new weapon. It introduced existential risk into human affairs in a way that had never existed before. For all of history, humans could destroy each other in large numbers, but we couldn't threaten our entire species. The atomic bomb changed that. For the first time, humans possessed the power to end their own civilization, possibly to render Earth largely uninhabitable. This fundamentally altered the stakes of conflict and the responsibility of leaders. From a military perspective, nuclear weapons made traditional conceptions of victory obsolete. You can't conquer a nuclear-armed adversary without being destroyed yourself. The strongest military in the world is still vulnerable to annihilation by a smaller adversary with even a handful of nuclear weapons. Military power hit a ceiling. Having 10,000 nuclear weapons isn't meaningfully different from having 1,000. You can only destroy the world once. Nuclear weapons also changed how all nations think about security. A small country with a modest nuclear arsenal can deter a much larger conventional military force. This is why so many countries have sought nuclear weapons despite international pressure. The psychological impact of living under nuclear threat has been profound. Generations grew up doing duck-and-cover drills, learning to hide under desks as if that would protect them from a nuclear blast. Popular culture filled with post-apocalyptic visions. The doomsday clock, maintained since 1947, shows how close humanity is to midnight, representing catastrophe. It's currently set at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been. For the Hibakusha, the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the bomb transformed their lives forever. They suffered from radiation sickness, cancer, and discrimination. Many devoted their lives to peace activism, warning the world about nuclear weapons. The cities themselves were rebuilt, but the memory remains. Hiroshima's Peace Memorial Park preserves the atomic bomb dome as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Every August 6th, thousands gather for a memorial ceremony. The mayor reads a peace declaration calling for nuclear abolition. Similar ceremonies occur in Nagasaki on August 9th. These rituals keep alive the memory of what nuclear weapons actually do, beyond the abstract calculations of megatons and strategic plans. Some argue that nuclear weapons should be eliminated entirely. As long as they exist, they could be used, and any use would be catastrophic. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was adopted in 2017 by 122 nations, declaring nuclear weapons illegal under international law. But complete disarmament faces enormous obstacles. Nuclear weapons can't be uninvented. Even if all weapons were eliminated, any major power could rebuild them within months if threatened. How do you verify complete disarmament? How do you prevent cheating? The security guarantees provided by nuclear weapons are real from the perspective of nations that possess them. There's also debate about whether a world without nuclear weapons would actually be safer. Would it be more prone to conventional great power wars like those that devastated the first half of the 20th century? Some argue that nuclear weapons, for all their horror, have prevented worse bloodshed by making major war unthinkable. Others argue this is dangerous rationalization, and that humanity got lucky during the Cold War, but may not be lucky forever. What's undeniable is that the atomic bomb created a situation where a single decision by a single leader could end human civilization. The President of the United States can order nuclear launch without consulting Congress. The process takes minutes. This concentration of apocalyptic power in individual hands is unprecedented and profoundly disturbing. The world today may be more dangerous than during the Cold War. More countries have nuclear weapons. Arms control is crumbling. Relations between nuclear powers are deteriorating. New technologies are making nuclear strategy less stable. Climate change is creating new pressures, and the generation that witnessed Hiroshima and Nagasaki is passing away, taking with them the visceral understanding of what nuclear weapons actually do. We face a choice about the future. Do we accept nuclear weapons as permanent and hope deterrence holds indefinitely? Or do we work toward a world where these weapons no longer exist? Or is there a middle path where they're gradually reduced to minimal levels? What's certain is that the question won't resolve itself. The atomic bomb changed warfare forever, but how that change ultimately affects human civilization remains to be seen. We're still living through that transformation, still dealing with the consequences of that first flash over Hiroshima. The bomb gave humanity the power to destroy itself. Whether we prove wise enough to avoid using that power may be the defining question of our species. 79 years have passed since August 6, 1945. That may seem like a long time, but in the span of human history, it's barely a moment. The atomic age is still young, and its story is far from over. How it ends will be determined by the choices we make in the years ahead, choices about how to handle the awesome and terrible power that science has placed in our hands. The bomb changed everything about warfare. Whether it will ultimately lead to our extinction or to a more peaceful world remains the greatest unanswered question of our time.